Letter from a Birmingham jail. 16th April 1963. My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause, answer criticism of my work and ideas if I sought to answer all the criticism that crossed my desk. My secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But since I feel that you are men of genuine good will, and that your circumstances are sincerely set forth, I want to try to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. I think I should indicate why I am here in Birmingham. Since you have been influenced by the view which argues against outsiders coming in, I have the honor of serving as president of Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization operating in every southern state. With headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia, we have some 85 affiliated organizations across the South, and one of them is the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. Frequently, we share staff, educational, and financial resources with our affiliates. Several months ago, affiliate here in Birmingham asked us to be on call to engage a benevolent direct action program if such were deemed necessary. We readily consented, and when the hour came, we lived up to our promise. So I, along with several members of my staff, am here because I was invited. I am here because I have organization ties here. But more basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I can not sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow provincial outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I am sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought out demonstrations. I am sure that none of you would want to rest content with the superficial kind of social analysis and deals merely with effects and does not grapple the underlying causes. It is unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham, but it is even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no alternative. In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps: collection of the facts to determine whether injustices exist, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. We have gone through all these steps in Birmingham. There can be no gainsaying the fact that racial injustice engulfs this community. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known. African Americans have experienced grossly unjust treatment in the courts. There have been more unsolved bombings in African American homes and churches in Birmingham than in any other city and nation. These are hard, brutal facts of the case. On the basis of these conditions, African American leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the latter consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiations. Then last September came the opportunity to talk with leaders in Birmingham economic community. In the course of negotiations, certain promises were made by the merchants, for example, to remove the store's humiliating racial signs. On the basis of these promises, in Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth and the leaders of the Alabama Christian Movement for the Human Rights agreed to a moratorium on all demonstrations. As the weeks and months went by, we realized that we were the victims of broken promise. A few signs briefly removed returned to the others remained. As in so many past experiences, our hopes had been blasted in the shadows of deep disappointment settled upon us. We had no alternative except to prepare for direct action whereby we would present our very bodies as a means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and national community. Mindful of the difficulties involved, we decided to undertake a process of self-purification. We began a series of workshops on nonviolence, and we repeatedly asked ourselves, are you able to accept blows without retaliating? Are you able to endure the ordeal of jail? We decided to schedule our direct action program for the Easter season, realizing that except for Christmas, this is the main shopping period of the year. Knowing that a strong economic withdrawal program would be the byproduct of direct action, we felt that this would be the best time to bring pressure to bear on the merchants for the needed change. Then it occurred to us that Birmingham mayoral election was coming up in March, and we speedily decided to postpone action until after Election Day, when we discovered that the Commissioner of Public Safety in Eugene, Bull Connor, had piled up enough votes to be in the runoff. We decided again to postpone action until the day after the runoff so that the demonstration could not be used to cloud the issues. Like many others, we waited to see Mr. Connor defeated, and this end we endured postponement after postponement. Having aided in this community need, we felt that our direct action program could be delayed no longer. You may well ask, why direct action, why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are quite right in calling negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks to dramatize the issue that can no longer be ignored. My seeding the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth, just as Socrates felt that it was necessary to create tension in the mind so that individuals could rise from the bondage of myths and half-truths to unfeathered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal. So must we see that the need for nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. The purpose of our direct action program is to create situations so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. I therefore concur with you in a call for negotiation. Too long has our beloved Southland been bogged down in tragic effort to live in monologue rather than dialogue. One of the basic points in your statement is that the action that I and my associates have taken in Birmingham is untimely. Some have asked, why didn't you give the new city administration time to act? The only answer that I can give to this query is that new Birmingham administration must be prodded about as much as the outgoing one before it will act. We are sadly mistaken if we feel the feel that the election of Albert Boatwell as mayor will bring the millennium to Birmingham, while Mr. Boatwell is much more gentle person than Mr. Connor. They are both segregationists dedicated to maintenance of the statues. Q. I have hope that Mr. Boatwell will be reasonable enough to see futility of massive resistance to desegregation, but he will not see this without pressure from the devotees of civil rights. My friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain in civil rights without determined legal and nonviolent pressure. Lamentably, it is the historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture, but as Reynold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups tend to be more immoral than individuals. We know through painful experiences the freedom is voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every African American with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. Now, what is the difference between the two? How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? A just law is man-made code that squares with the moral of the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human that is not rooted in external law and natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority, persons of the statues of things. Hence, segregation is not only politically, economically, and sociologically unsound, it is morally wrong and sinful. Paul Tillich has said that sin is separation, it is not segregation. An existential expression of man's tragic separation has awful estrangement, his terrible sinfulness. Thus it is that I can urge men to obey the 1954 decision of the Supreme Court, for it is morally right, and I can urge them to disobey segregation or ordinance, for they are morally wrong. Let us consider a more concrete example of just and unjust laws. An unjust law is a code that numerical or power majority group completes a minority group to obey, but does not make binding on itself. This is difference made legal. By the same token, a just law is a code that majority compels a minority to follow, and that it is willing to follow itself. This is sameness made legal. Let me give another explanation. A law is unjust if it is inflicted on a minority that, as a result of being denied the right to vote, had no part in enacting or devising the law. Who can say that this legislator of Alabama, which set up that states of segregation laws, was democratically elected? Throughout Alabama, all sorts of divisive methods are used to prevent African Americans from becoming registered voters, and there are some countries in which, even though African Americans constitute a majority of the population, not a single African American is registered. Can any law enacted under such circumstances be considered democratically structured? Sometimes a law just on its face and unjust is an application. For instance, I have been arrested on a charge of parading without a permit. Now, there is nothing wrong in having an ordinance which requires a permit for a parade, but such an ordinance becomes unjust when it is used to maintain segregation and deny citizens the First Amendment privilege of peaceful assembly and protest. I hope you are able to see distinction I am trying to point out. In no sense so I advocate evading or defying the law as would the rabid segregationists that would lead to anarchy. One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, with willingness to accept the penalty. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust, and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice, is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law. Of course, there is nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was evident sublimely in the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar on the ground that a higher moral law was at stake. It was practiced superbly by the early Christians who were willing to face hungry lions and the excruciating pain of chopping blocks rather than submit to certain unjust laws of the Roman Empire. To a degree, academic freedom is a reality today because Socrates practiced civil disobedience in our own nation. The Boston Tea Party represented a massive act of civil disobedience. We should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal, and everything that Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to aid and comfort a Jew in Hitler's Germany. Even so, I am sure that had I lived in Germany at the time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers. If today I lived in a communist country where certain principles dear to the Christian faith are suppressed, I would openly advocate disobeying the country's anti-religious laws. I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the past few years I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the African American's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen counselor for the Ku Klux Klanner, but that white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with you with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he set Sorry. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice, and that when they fail in the purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that the present tension in the South is a necessary phase of the transition from an obnoxious negative peace in which the African American passively accepted his unjust plight to a substantive and positive peace, in which all men will respect the dignity of worth of human personality. Actually, who engage in non-violent direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive. We bring it out in the open where it can be seen and dealt with, like a wound that can never be cured, so long as it covered up but most but must be opened with all its ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light. Injustice must be exposed with all the tension its exposure created to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. In your statement, you assert that our actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because the precipient violence, but it is this logical assertion. Isn't this like condemning a robbed bank because his society must protect the robbed and punish the robber? I had also hoped that the white moderate would reject the myth concerning time in relation to the struggle for freedom. I have just received a letter from 2,000 years a white brother in Texas. He writes, all Christians of Christ take time to come to earth. Such an attitude stems from a tragic misconception of time, from the strangely irrational notion that there is something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills. Actually, time itself is neutral. It can be used either destructively or constructively. More and more, I feel that the people of ill will have used time much more effectively than have the people of goodwill. We will have the repent in the generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts of men willing to be co-workers with God, and without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively in knowledge that the time is always right to do it right. Now it is time to make real promise of democracy and to transform our pending national elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity. It is true that the police have exercised a degree of discipline in handling the demonstrators. In this sense, they have conducted themselves rather non-violently in public, but for what purpose? To preserve the evil system of segregation. Over the past few years, I have constantly preached that the nonviolence demands that the means we use must be as pure as the ends we seek. I have tried to make clear that it is wrong to use immoral means to attain moral ends, but now I must affirm that it is just as wrong, or perhaps even more so, to use immoral means to preserve immoral ends. Perhaps Mr. Connor and his policemen have been rather nonviolent in public, as the chief preachant in Albany, Georgia, but they have used the moral means of nonviolence to maintain the immoral end of racial injustice. As T.S. Eliot has said, the last temptation is the greatest tension, to do right deed for the wrong reason. I wish you had commended the African American sit-inners and demonstrators of Birmingham for the sublime courage, their willingness to suffer, and their amazing disciplines in the midst of great provocation. One day the South will recognize in real heroes. They will be the James Merediths with the noble sense of purpose that enables them to face jeering and hostile mobs, and with the agonizing loneliness that characterizes the life of pioneer. They will be old, oppressed, better African American women, symbolized in 72-year-old woman in Montgomery, Alabama, who rose up in the sense of dignity, and with her people decided that not to ride segregated buses, and who responded with ungrammatical profanity to one who inquired about her weariness. My feet is tired, but my soul is at rest. They will be the young high school and college students, the young minister of the gospel and the host of their elders, courageously and non-violently sitting at the lunch counters and willingly going to jail for conscience sake. One day the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down in the lunch counters, they were reality, standing up for what's best in American dream, and for the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage, thereby bringing our nation back to those great wells of democracy, which were dug deep in the founding fathers in their formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Never before have I written so long a letter. I'm afraid it is much too long to take your precious time. I can assure you that it would have been much shorter if I had been writing from a comfortable desk, but what else can I do when he is alone in a narrow jail cell other than write long letters, think long thoughts, and pray long prayers? If I have said anything in this letter that overstates the truth and indicates an unreasonable impatience, I beg you to forgive me. If I have said anything that understates the truth and indicates my having a patience that allows me to settle for anything less than brotherhood, I beg God to forgive me. I hope this letter finds you strong in faith. I also hope that circumstances will soon make it possible for me to meet each of you, not an integritist, creationist, or a civil rights leader, but as a fellow clergy man and a Christian brother. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away, and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities, and in some not too distant tomorrow the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all scintillity beauty.